Ethical Atheist here, and I'm excited because I'm going to start my series on Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 through 14 and 21 through 24, and where it's talking about the narrow gate and wide gate, and where it's talking about what a true disciple is. But in order to do that, first we got to give you context, because context is very important. Don't you realize how many people take things out of context? We're constantly calling out Christians for their ability to just take things out of context. And we're also sometimes cherry picking and just throwing scriptures at them, trying to condemn them. And let's not do that. Let's go all the way back to Matthew chapter 5, where this whole thing starts. So if you're going to read chapter 7, you got to go all the way back to chapter 5 so you can understand it, because it's called the Sermon on the Mount. And it starts with the Beatitudes, attitudes that ought to be. Copacetic, it's all cool, good stuff. Anyway, it moves from that to Jesus talks about salt and light. He talks about the law. He talks about anger. He talks about adultery. He talks about divorce. He talks about vows, how to make vows. He talks about revenge, and he talks about loving enemies, and that's all in chapter 5. And then he moves to chapter 6, where he starts talking about giving to the poor. He starts talking about prayer and fasting. He starts talking about, after that, he talks about money and possessions. And then he moves to chapter 7, where he starts off talking about don't condemn, not judging. I know that that's what we're used to. It says do not judge, but a better translation, New Living Translation, much better. It talks about don't condemn people. Obviously, we have to make judgment calls at times. We're just not supposed to be assholes about it. Anyway, he talks about what effective prayer looks like, Our Father who art in heaven. And then the golden rule, doing to others as you would have them doing to you. Good principle. Live by it. And that brings us to the narrow gate in verse 13 and 14. And that's all we're going to cover today, because I want to leave you with a thought. So I'm going to read it. All right, here it goes. Verse 13 and 14 out of Matthew chapter 7. You can enter God's kingdom only through the narrow gate. The highway to hell is broad, and his gate is wide, for many choose the easy way. The easy way. I like that, right? Verse 14. But the gateway to life is small, and the road is narrow. And only a few ever find it. You know how Christians are always telling each other, oh, they're not a Christian, they're not a Christian, they're not. I think they're right. Because Jesus sets up forth a lot of criteria for what a real Christian is. If you're going to follow him, there's criteria. And he says that few will ever find it. So, for now, I want you to think about what that means. Put something in the comments. And think about, what does it mean only few? How many? What is few? Peace and love, y'all.